Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second session of the African Union 3S Capacity Strengthening Programme. This is session 2 of Module 1, following on from the introductory session that we had last week, and was very well attended, and I anticipate similar numbers joining this morning. I think we had almost 300 across the African Union countries joining us last week. So that was really encouraging. As a reminder, if you weren't here last week, my name's Mick Foy. I'm the Head of Pharmacovigilance Strategy at the MHRA, and I'll just mention a little bit about the MHRA in a moment. So, try and get the slides. This morning, I'll be joined by Dr. Jolyn Choi, Senior Medical Assessor at the MHRA, who will be discussing the importance of adverse drug reaction data and with a specific slant on the all-important considerations for vaccine data. And in the second part of this morning's module, Kendall Harrison, the Pandemic Systems Delivery Manager at the MHRA, will be talking about tools and resources for data collection and management. If you're not familiar with Zoom and you weren't with us last week, just some explanations around how the tool will be working this morning. So we have a Q&A function. This is to submit questions throughout the webinar. We'll address those questions either in writing, if we can, during the course of the sessions, or pick them up for discussion at the Q&A point in time at the Q&A slot at the end of the webinar. There's also a chat function. We'd ask you to use this chat function to inform us of any technical issues rather than submitting questions. Everyone is on mute just to help with the flow of the module, and we are recording this session, so the slides and the video will be made available for colleagues to share, as will the write-up of the question and answer session. If you were here last week and you're waiting on the Q&A document, that's being finalized at the minute, so you will receive that within the next few days, hopefully. Again, we have, as mentioned, a good number of attendees from a large number of organizations, both within the 3S program and colleagues from healthcare provider systems and regulatory agencies across the African Union. So you're all very, very welcome. As a reminder, the Smart Safety Surveillance Program is an initiative funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and led by the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. The MHRA are proud partners of the 3S program. We're very pleased to lend our technical support for both the day-to-day working of the 3S program, but also in capacity development as we're here for this morning. The MHRA is the medicines regulator for the UK. We regulate medicines and medical devices, and our mission is to make sure that they work and are acceptably safe. And we do that through our licensing, inspection, enforcement, and pharmacovigilance activities. As mentioned, we're an executive agency of the UK's Department of Health and Social Care. We have around 1,200 staff, and we're primarily located in normal times in offices in Canary Wharf in London. However, as most of us, we're currently working from home. We also have the National Institute of Biological Standards and Control, which is based just outside of London. And importantly, that's the part of the organisation that does batch testing and batch release, amongst other things, for the vaccines. So as you can imagine, they're extremely busy at the moment, focusing on the all-important release of the COVID-19 vaccines. Our vision is that we protect and improve the health of millions of people every day through that regulation of medicines and medical devices. And when we say the health of millions of people, just to reiterate what was said last week, that is not just UK citizens, but pharmacovigilance is truly a global system. And we're very aware and mindful that pharmacovigilance issues that are picked up in the UK will be of benefit to people around the globe. And likewise, we're keen to strengthen pharmacovigilance systems around the globe because the issues that are picked up in other countries will be of importance to UK citizens. So we are just coming back to this program. We are in module 1, data collection. This is session 2. And we will be moving forward in February, March and April with further sessions on signal detection, benefit risk assessment, safety communications, and the role of pharmacovigilance expert advisory committees. So there will be a number of modules in this program for colleagues to follow. And depending on your area of interest, you feel free to dip in and out of different modules to suit your particular needs. As mentioned, we started with the first session last week, which was primarily an introduction to pharmacovigilance. And today we're focusing, digging a little bit deeper on ADR data and vaccine-specific considerations and the use of some of the tools that we use and make available to others to use to improve our capabilities in pharmacovigilance. The aims of today are to provide that high-level overview, basic understanding of the spontaneous reporting systems, and then moving into some more vaccine specific considerations. And as mentioned, some of the tools that we'll be using. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jolyn Choi. As mentioned, she's a senior medical assessor at the MHRA, and we'll be taking you through part 1 of today's session. Thank you, Jolyn. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mick. I hope you can all hear me. And welcome, colleagues, to this session. As Mick was saying, my name is Jolyn, and I will be taking you through this part of the session on vaccine adverse events and adverse drug reactions and any vaccine-specific considerations. By way of brief introduction, I have worked for 7 years at the MHRA as a medical assessor, primarily in pharmacovigilance and safety. And prior to that, I was also a doctor in the National Health Service here in the UK and spent a brief period of time in industry as well. So I hope to be able to share some very useful insights and experience with you today. So this slide just shows you a content of the session that we'll be talking about today. So we'll start with an introduction and an example of a framework for vaccine safety based on the UK experience. And I'll talk you through the division of responsibilities within this framework, the stakeholders involved and their individual roles, and not forgetting the roles of vaccine marketing authorization holders as well. We'll then move on to talk about vaccine adverse events and adverse drug reactions, and we'll be talking about why we collect data on this, any special considerations for vaccines as compared to medicines, the type of data which is important to capture, special situations with vaccines, and how the data that we collect can be used. We'll then move on to talk about adverse events of special interest, what these are, how they're used in vaccine pharmacovigilance. Finally, we'll end with talking about examples of new immunization programs, and I'll illustrate this with some case studies and examples from the experience in the UK. Just trying to move the slide on. So without further ado, we'll plunge into the first topic, which is the vaccine safety monitoring framework. So the MHRA, as Mick was saying, is the regulatory authority for all medicinal products in the UK, and this includes vaccines. The regulatory arm of the MHRA works in conjunction with the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, and the MHRA itself is an agency of the Department of Health and Social Care. We work very closely with the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization, also known as the JCVI, and the JCVI decides on immunization policies, so who gets vaccinated, when they get vaccinated, and where. In the UK, most routine vaccinations in the National Health Service are childhood vaccinations, and these are provided in primary care or in school facilities. But we also do have a small number of vaccines which we use for the over 65s. And these are things like the pneumococcal vaccine, the influenza vaccine, and the shingles vaccine. So the MHRA is a fairly large organization, and for vaccines, there are several divisions that work in tandem to ensure effectiveness, safety, and quality. And we also work to ensure that this continues throughout the life cycle of the product. So right from the beginning, at the time of authorization, there are mainly three divisions that work closely together. And this would be the biologicals unit of the licensing division, which primarily look at immunogenicity and quality. The Vigilance and Risk Management of Medicines Division, which cooperate with Licensing Division for safety and also consider how safety will continue after the approval of the vaccine. And finally, the Inspection, Enforcement and Standards Division look at continued quality post-approval and are there for any manufacturing issues as well. So it's important right from the start to have the division of roles and expertise to ensure that the right people are there to be able to assess the data with vaccines that is coming in and respond to specific situations as well. So there are several different organizations and individual groups which are all stakeholders in vaccine safety, and these are all important equally and all play a role. So besides the MHRA, I've already mentioned some of the policymakers, which are the JCVI, the Department of Health and Social Care, and there are also other national and local public health authorities involved. The National Institute of Biological Standards and Control, I've already mentioned as the authority responsible for releasing batches. And there are also other organizations responsible for surveillance of disease, which is being vaccinated against. And of these, in the UK, Public Health England is the largest, but there are also public health organizations in the devolved nations, that's Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And these are primarily responsible for evaluating the incidence of the disease being vaccinated against, vaccine uptake, and the impact of any immunization programs being conducted. We also have, as other stakeholders, healthcare organizations and professional bodies. And in the UK, this would include the National Health Service and other organizations responsible for general practitioners, doctors, and nurses as well. And let's not forget the public themselves, so the people being vaccinated and the people who care for them. And within the public, I would also include the ever-present media organizations, and within that, the growing presence of social media as well. So this is an example of how vaccine safety, the stakeholders for vaccine safety in the UK, but this is very similar across many countries. As I said, we shouldn't forget the role of the marketing authorization holders. They have a very important role to play as well. So they are responsible for reporting adverse events and adverse drug reactions to national competent authorities from various sources and to evaluate these as well. They also are responsible for planning a pharmacovigilance strategy proactively, and they may have to conduct active surveillance or conduct post-authorization safety studies. They should also be responsible for including wording to encourage reporting of adverse drug reactions and adverse events on all material they produce, including product information and any communications to healthcare professionals and patients. So we'll move on to the next portion of the talk about vaccine AEs and ADRs. So why do we monitor vaccine safety? So at the time of licensing, clinical trials do provide some safety information, but we do know that the size of these trials are quite limited. So most trials for medicines will have around 2,000 people. And this is a small number when compared to the large numbers which will be vaccinated in real life. And we anticipate that most clinical trials will not actually detect rare events. We also know that most trials don't last for very long periods of time. The majority of them last about 1 to 2 years, so they cannot detect events which take a longer period of time to manifest. Most clinical trials also exclude vulnerable groups. So these are people like pregnant women, the very elderly, and children. So there's not much information in these groups. So generally, clinical trials are able to provide information on things like reactogenicity, which are events due to the activation of the immune system common to most vaccines. And we may get a few serious events from clinical trials, which are not easy to assess causality for with limited information. So even with our best efforts at the time of authorization, we really don't know that much about newly authorized vaccines. So we need good surveillance post-authorization. There are some additional challenges as well that we need to think about when thinking about vaccine pharmacovigilance compared to pharmacovigilance with medicines. So we know that recipients of vaccines tend to be largely healthy individuals, and they are less likely to tolerate risks when compared to medicines, which are mostly given to ill patients who may be willing to tolerate more side effects in order to get well. People may also not have a very high view of the benefits of vaccines because due to very successful vaccination campaigns, many of the diseases vaccinated against are now very rare. And so people may not have encountered very serious disease as a result. People may also have to wait a very long time to see any clear benefits from their vaccine as well. Vaccines on the whole are given to very large numbers of people, and therefore we will almost certainly see some very rare, very serious events, and these may be perceived very negatively by members of the public. In a mass vaccination campaign as well, if a potential risk does emerge, it can be very challenging to investigate this because it can be hard to find people who haven't received the vaccine to compare this with. In addition, we should take into account the biological variability with the vaccines, which means we may see differences in effects between batches of vaccines. And the benefit risk balance of the vaccine may change over time. So depending on the disease incidence or whether you're able to eliminate the disease geographically, the benefit risk may no longer remain favorable. Finally, fear of the vaccine should not be underestimated. This is a very real risk and must be taken seriously if and when it emerges and managed adequately. The consequences that could arise may not only be for the population that is being vaccinated, but also on the wider population if a disease increases in incidence as a result of failure of vaccine uptake. So this slide shows you the life cycle of a vaccine program. So the red line indicates the cases of disease at baseline, which hopefully should fall as you start to see vaccination uptake increase as indicated by the blue line. And the idea is for us to then monitor adverse reactions occurring with a vaccine as shown by the green line and avoid loss of public confidence, which may result in a fall of vaccine uptake as shown by 0.5 and therefore increase in cases of disease as shown by 0.6. So with unfounded vaccine scares, it's very important to address these in order to maintain public confidence. So this slide shows you some examples of times where public fear of a vaccine risk, which was not proven to be true, led to a decrease in vaccine uptake and subsequently negative consequences. However, it is important to note that vaccines can indeed have real risks. So surveillance is important because occasionally we do find these. So the example given on the slide is with Guillain-Barré syndrome from the swine flu vaccine in 1976, but other examples include vaccine-associated enhanced disease with the dengue vaccine. So to maintain confidence, a delicate balance needs to be trod. So the public need to trust that national competent authorities are performing adequate surveillance to be able to discriminate between real and false events. And national competent authorities themselves need to be aware of these real risks and take measures to protect the public wherever possible and constantly evaluate if the benefit-risk balance of the vaccine is still favorable. So all of us here on this call has a very important role in influencing this, either by reporting the adverse events or adverse reactions, or by evaluating these. The pandemic itself has provided us with many challenges, as we all know, and COVID-19 related vaccine programs have been no exception to this. So there are several considerations specific to COVID-19 that we need to consider as well. So firstly, a lot of these are novel vaccines and we have no prior safety experience to compare these with. COVID-19 itself is a very rapidly changing landscape. So as much as there are new vaccines emerging all the time, there are also new strains of virus which the vaccines may not be effective on. Globally, there will be millions of people immunized in a relatively short space of time. And so information will emerge very rapidly from many programs worldwide. And also not forgetting the accelerated regulatory timelines means that there has been concern from some members of the public because the duration of trials has not been very long. Next. Moving on. So how do we find out about vaccine risks occurring in the general population? If you attended the previous session, you will have heard from there, and also you will hear more in the next part of this session as well. You get people to report them to you. So here in the UK, we have what's called the yellow card scheme, where healthcare professionals and patients can report any adverse events or suspected adverse drug reactions directly to the MHRA. But there are similar schemes run by national regulators all over the world, and you may well have similar schemes in your own country. The MHRA has also provided a specific coronavirus yellow card reporting site, and this is for reporting events specific to therapeutic agents for COVID-19 treatment or for vaccines intended to prevent COVID-19. So in the next few slides, I'll talk you through some useful information which you may get from reports. I have to say at this point that some reports come with very little information, but the more information you can get, the more you can establish a picture of what is actually occurring. So with information on patient details, the more you get, the more you can paint a picture of who is experiencing these effects. So this may be the age groups who are affected, or whether this is occurring in individuals with pre-existing disease, pregnant women, or if you know their occupation, is this occurring in healthcare professionals, for example. Particularly for vaccines, and especially if there's more than one vaccine for the condition that's trying to be prevented, you should establish the brand name so you know which vaccine the event is occurring with. It's also important for vaccines to establish batch numbers in case issues are arising with a specific batch. Some other important information to gather are things like administration technique errors, which you may find lead to unusual events. So for example, you may see things like injection site infections or cellulitis arising from one or two specific centers, or if a vaccine is being given by a different route from intended, such as subcutaneous instead of intramuscular, it may be that further training is needed at a site. It's important as well to try and establish the timing of the vaccines. So for example, were vaccines given according to the schedule that they were meant to, or were there any delays in this and why? It's also important to get, if you can, the immunization history. So for example, were other vaccines given around the same time? So for example, it's winter here in the UK and the influenza vaccine campaign has not long finished. However, with COVID-19 vaccines, we don't have that much information about co-administration with other vaccines. So we like to be able to get as much information as possible if a patient has had another vaccine administered recently, and if that's led to an adverse event. You should also try and get as much information as you can about the reaction as possible, because this will help you to try to establish if we think the vaccine caused the adverse reaction or adverse event. Causality assessment will be covered in future modules, so I won't go into this in huge detail, except to say it's not usually possible, or it's quite difficult to establish causality just from one case, but the more detail you have on this, the more you can use this in your evaluation. So some things you might be interested in with the reaction as well is how serious the reaction was, how severe it was, and any outcomes, because any permanent or fatal events, for example, may need more consideration than any transient non-serious events. And I suppose the important thing is you should try and follow up with the reporter if there's important information or details missing that's not available in the report. So as I was saying, you should try to encourage as much reporting as possible for any new vaccines, but we are particularly interested in populations that are underrepresented in clinical trials. So these, for example, are children and pregnant women and the elderly. We are interested in all serious reactions, And medication errors as well are particularly interesting in case a pattern emerges which you think needs to be resolved. So for example, is the wrong vaccine being given by accident? Are the wrong individuals being vaccinated? And you should try and work out why this is happening and how to prevent any future events. There are also some events that are specific to vaccines. So this would include things like breakthrough infections, where the vaccinated individuals go on to develop the disease that the vaccine is intended to prevent. Reversion to virulence, which is primarily applicable to live vaccines, where the vaccine reverts to its virulent form. And following that, you can also get secondary transmission, where there's transmission of the vaccine strain of the virus. Quality issues can always emerge, and it's good to have a method by which these can be reported to the National Competent Authority. When the National Competent Authority is made aware, they should collaborate with relevant organizations and the marketing authorization holder as well. And it's also important to share relevant information with other countries who may be using the same vaccine or using vaccines from the same manufacturing site so that appropriate action can be taken at their end. What do we do with all the data that we then collect? So most reports in the UK are reported directly to the MHRA, as I said, from the yellow card scheme. And these reports are committed to our database on a daily basis and available for evaluation the next day mainly. We evaluate this for signal detection purposes. So signal detection is again covered in detail in future sessions, so I won't go into very much detail here. But essentially, we are looking for signals. So these are untoward or unwanted medical events that are occurring in relation to a medicinal product or a vaccine, which we previously didn't know about, or which we did know about, but is now occurring at a higher severity or a higher frequency than we expected. So these reports are a major source of data for signal detection for us, along with other sources. But as I say, this will be covered in further detail in future models, so stay tuned. Occasionally, you may get isolated cases or clusters of cases of an event, and there may be a lot of pressure put on the national competent authorities to take action quickly, such as quarantining or recalling a batch based on very limited details. It's very important beforehand to have good links with the relevant public health bodies to be able to obtain important information on batch distribution and on any alternative batches available should you need to recall a batch. You should also be prepared with data on aspects like mortality statistics, for example, to be able to put any isolated fatalities into perspective. Along these lines, on working very quickly on cases, another example which you may have heard of, shortly following the start of the vaccination campaign for COVID-19 in the US and the UK, there was very few cases of allergic reactions reported, and action was taken very quickly to issue precautionary advice and statements to the media, and the MHRA tried to be as transparent about events as possible by providing relevant information to the public and to the NHS. The MHRA does also use various expert advisory groups to seek advice, the main ones being the Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group and the Biologicals Expert Advisory Group, but there are also others depending on the specialist advice being sought, for example, neurology, respiratory, maternal and women's health. We also set up ad hoc expert working groups as needed. For example, we do also have COVID-19 expert working groups. Moving on then to the next portion of the talk about adverse events of special interest. So these are of particular interest because they are of concern with vaccines and considered high priority events. And they could be of special interest because they're related to vaccines more generally, or related to the specific vaccine platform, or known to occur with the underlying disease which is intended to be prevented. And if you do get a report of these may require more investigation, for example, by preparing follow-up forms in advance to seek more information about these. There are several lists of adverse events of special interest publicly available. So, for example, the Brighton collaboration produced this. The European Medicines Agency also do have their own list. They both differ slightly, but there are some examples of common terms listed in both lists. And the reasons these are included as well, and this is shown in the table on the right. So as an example, vaccine-associated enhanced disease is an adverse event of special interest with COVID-19 vaccines. It's of concern with regulators worldwide due to the risks previously seen with other vaccines and some data from animal models as well. When you're investigating adverse events of special interest, case definitions are quite important to be able to correctly identify these. And to do this, the use of standard definitions are preferred. So I mentioned the Brighton collaboration, and this is a global initiative which works to provide standard definitions of adverse events of special interest with vaccines based on evidence and expert consensus. And as I say, this is publicly available. And having a standardized definition is very useful in case evaluation. Finally, we'll move on to the last portion of the talk about new immunization programs and vaccination campaigns. So we need to understand the national program national vaccination program in your country, the policies around this, how the vaccine will be delivered, and recognize all the stakeholders involved prior to the rollout of the vaccine. You may have to take all this information into account as part of proactive pharmacovigilance planning. For example, is the immunization schedule intended to be the same in your country compared to other countries? Are there any predicted difficulties with transport or cold chain storage of the vaccine? And have a think about any other issues which may impact on the safety or effectiveness of the vaccine. These programs and policies can differ between countries, and so any concerns or issues relevant for one country may not be relevant for another, and so the safety profile and benefit risk of the vaccine may differ between countries. You should note as well with new campaigns, you will get very rapid immunization of very large groups of people as well, and you will need to be prepared for this. As I was saying previously, it's good to establish links with other key stakeholders beforehand as part of prior planning, and you should decide on and have in place elements of your pharmacovigilance strategy before the vaccine rollout. Some examples of this is you may decide to have additional activities to enhance monitoring. For example, in some countries, there are plans to solicit reports from targeted groups of vaccinees, and this is more active than just waiting for reports to be reported to the national competent authority. So beforehand, it may help to consider what events may be encountered as well based on the known properties of the vaccine. For example, an adjuvanted vaccine may result in more reactogenic reactions being reported, or a live vaccine, as I was saying, may reactivate. So you may want to look at experience from other countries where this has previously been rolled out as well. Just to finally mention as well, you should think about the patient population. So in many countries, the COVID-19 vaccine strategy has included both relatively young healthcare workers and much older patients with underlying comorbidities. And these are very different populations with very different safety profiles. So this is just a slide showing the long history of vaccine development over the years in the UK. It's not the most up to date as it doesn't include last year's vaccines, but it shows that we've gained experiences along the way. And I hope to show you this in the final few slides. So just to discuss the UK's experience with the Meningitis C vaccine. So as an example, so the Meningitis C vaccine campaign started from 1999, and at the time the MHRA didn't do any specific pharmacovigilance planning, and we ended up receiving a large number of reports quite quickly. And so we subsequently set up an expert working group to assist with advice for all the signals that we were seeing. And as this slide shows, we did review a few safety signals from the reports that we received, but not all of these resulted in further regulatory action. Following on from that, we had the human papillomavirus vaccination campaign. And this time we had learned from the meningitis C experience. And so we we had proactive planning for this campaign a year in advance of its rollout. We established a list of adverse events of special interest with this vaccine. We worked very closely with the Department of Health and Social Care to get relevant data to enable us to perform more detailed signal detection and to perform epidemiological analyses as well. We proactively put out a call for reporting from healthcare professionals and set up a dedicated webpage for this. We also then published any safety assessment reports from reviews we had done and summaries of ADRs. So you can see we were much better prepared for this one as compared to meningitis C. This slide shows you some other examples. So we have continued to build on our previous experience and employed a lot of techniques that we've previously used for pharmacovigilance with older vaccines on the newer ones. So this is my final, slide. If I can get to it. And it just shows you a historical cartoon from the 18th century that I found amusing. And this illustrates an early smallpox immunization campaign by inoculating people with cowpox virus. And it's interesting because the fear of the vaccine was very great at the time, or the inoculation was very great at the time. And people thought they would grow a cow's head as a result of being inoculated with cowpox vaccine. And it shows that even though this was 300 years ago, there are similar unfounded fears about vaccines today. There's just some useful links that I'll leave you with as well, in case anyone's interested in further information. And thank you very much for listening. I think we can now move to the question and answer portion of this talk.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jolene. And a few questions have come in. I think the first one was around batch release. This is from ASEFA. Wanting to know why it's important to have both regulatory authority as the MHRA and a batch release authority. Perhaps you could explain a little bit about the batch release process at NIBS.
I think it says Alicia would like to answer this question, but we have different functions. So the batch release authorities at the National Institute of Biological Standards and Controls looks at things like quality aspects and whether the batches are consistent and have the quality specifications that have been agreed, whereas the regulatory center looks at other things such as kind of effectiveness data and safety data. So they do play very different roles. And that's primarily why there are two different authorities under the umbrella of the MHRA. I hope that somewhat answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. I think the next one is more of a comment from the Galaxy phone. I can't see a name, but it was really, I think, a statement around the importance of the work that's being done in the pandemic. But if there's a particular question, whoever submitted that via the Galaxy tab, perhaps you could draw out something for us. But Isaac asked, is there a particular reason we are using, or Jolene, you've been using the term ADR instead of AEFI? We hear a lot about AEFIs with regard to vaccine vigilance. Perhaps you could explain.
Sure, I thought this question might come up actually. So we use the term adverse event or suspected adverse drug reaction a lot in the MHRA, but it's just another term for a similar thing. So adverse events following immunization is also equally valid. An adverse reaction implies causality, whereas with an adverse event, we are not certain of the causality, and that still needs to be established. But that is a good question. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think just for colleagues' information who are interested in AEFIs, Kendall will be coming on to talk about some of the tools that we use. And often AEFI is really the form that's used to complete the information on either an adverse reaction or an adverse event. And these AEFI forms are being developed for the mobile app that's being used for the submission of information on adverse events following immunization. So probably a little bit more to come on that. Got a question, can COVID vaccination start as soon as possible? Well, this is a national, an issue of national policy and availability of vaccines. Yeah, you will know from the news probably that the UK started immunising our population in the second week of December, and have really ramped up vaccination. And we know from discussions in the 3S programme that the rollout of vaccinations in the African Union will be starting to take place over the next couple of months. But that's outside of our control. It will be a national policy decision and somewhat coordinated by colleagues at WHO as well. Jolene, how are AESI different from AEFI? I think we may have touched on this, but just to clarify for Samuel.
I'm not as familiar with the AESI term. What's the full, kind of what does the abbreviation stand for?
I think it may be the adverse events of special interest.
Oh, right. Sorry. I mentioned it in my talk. Sorry. So adverse events of special interest, you proactively decide that these are of particular concern with the vaccines for the reasons that I previously highlighted. So because it may be specific to a specific vaccine platform that you're using, or it's been associated with the disease that you're trying to prevent, or you've seen this previously with other vaccines. So before you roll out the campaign, you try to establish some adverse events that you're particularly worried about that may appear with the vaccine, and you look for these events, or you wait for them to be reported.
And then Tesfaye was asking what's the difference between campaign and regular vaccine. I'm not too clear on what the question there is, Tesfaye, but if I hazard a guess, it may be around routine vaccinations such as flu that happens every year, and where we maybe ramp up a communications campaign, such as in the case of the COVID vaccine. I think you mentioned HPV as well, Jolene, that where there is a particular national interest and it's a new vaccine, there may be more communications that will be needed to, one, encourage people to take the vaccine because of the public health importance of that program. And then secondly, from a pharmacovigilance perspective, encourage the reporting maybe on a scale, and it may be a new population that hadn't been exposed to vaccination previously. So you want to encourage and campaign for awareness around both the program, but also the reporting of adverse events. But Jolene, you may want to add to that.
No, I think you covered everything, Mick. And I did mention that there were some specific considerations with COVID-19 campaigns, including that, there are new vaccine virus strains that are constantly emerging and the landscape is constantly changing. You get a lot of new information very quickly. So that's some of the differences from sort of the routine campaigns that we have, so to speak.
And then Tani has asked, how can we monitor distribution of the quality of vaccines? There may be fake vaccines, and yes, I mean, sadly, I think we've already heard of some fake AstraZeneca vaccine in Africa being peddled, and this is of huge concern. There are technologies like barcoding that try and combat counterfeit products in the supply chain. We also use in the UK our pharmacovigilance system. You can report a yellow card to if you suspect that the product that you have is a fake or a counterfeit product, and we'll investigate that. But it's of huge concern, sadly, that these activities continue to blight us. But I don't know, Jolene, if you want to make any comment around any specific considerations that we have in signal detection that may identify potential counterfeits.
So I would say it's very important, as I was highlighting throughout the presentation, to have very good links with and collaborate with other agencies, as well, as they can be very crucial in identifying these events of fake vaccines being used. I mean, our colleagues in Public Health England, for example, would be some that we would turn to. And of course, we have a very good inspection and enforcement and standards, enforcement of standards division as well, which helps to identify and enforce these. I mean, from signal detection purposes, we're very reliant on people, again, to report these to us. And when we do find that events of fake vaccines being used have been reported, on the burdens on us, the responsibilities on us to then act very quickly, try to establish any adverse events that may be occurring with these, and put out good, reliable information to the public as to how to discriminate between a fake and a real vaccine as much as possible.
Probably the other thing to mention, and it may be specific to MHRA, but I know other regulatory authorities globally will have, if not the same function, contacts to carry out the function, is we have an enforcement department within MHRA, and these have legal powers to enter, make arrest when there are counterfeit activities and other sort of illegal activities with regard to medicines and medical devices. So we may detect a counterfeit problem, and our enforcement colleagues will work with the police and other law enforcement agencies to act upon those findings and make arrests if possible, shut down these operations. And they act globally because often the supply of the counterfeit product doesn't come within our own borders. So this is an international operation that takes place continuously, with sharing of information, sharing of intelligence, and acting on that intelligence to shut these crooks down. So each country will have hopefully some resources to not just identify counterfeits, but also act upon and shut down these illegal operations. Another question about batch release, Jolene. What does the batch release agency do, just to release batches for vaccines, or is there more to it than that?
So as I was saying earlier, partly in response to the other question, they're primarily looking at quality. So because these are biological products, it's quite difficult to ensure that the quality is always consistent for every single batch. But we need that quality to be consistent because we need to know that it's going to work, and we need to know that it's not going to have any impurities or any things in it that will make it unsafe to use. So the batch release, when they're evaluating that, they're primarily looking for quality aspects to ensure that it's consistent in quality throughout all the batches. Hope that answers that question.
There's an interesting one from George here, and one I think that we all it's something that's important to all of us. A lot of reports coming in. How do we reduce these reactions to avoid non-compliance from people who intend to take the vaccine? So I guess this is when a lot of reports come in and people are made aware of the kind of reactions that are happening, many of which are expected and common to all vaccines, I guess, but it does, I guess, increase vaccine hesitancy. How can we avoid that?
No, that's a very good question, George, and it's part of why we do signal detection, because if you can identify a risk occurring with a vaccine or a medicine, you can try and take measures to help people to minimize the impact or the risk of that occurring. So if you for example, identify it's occurring with a specific population, or a specific population is more at risk, you can warn that population proactively. Or for example, with say reactogenicity reactions like fever, headaches, muscle aches, which very commonly occur, a lot of the vaccine product information says things like you can take paracetamol or antipyretics to try and reduce those symptoms. So by identifying the reactions, the goal is to try and look for ways in which you can minimize the impact on the public and the population who are taking the vaccine, and send out messaging to that effect. So yeah, it highlights the importance of very good signal detection and risk minimization activities as well throughout the product's life cycle.
There are more questions coming in through the Q&A box, and I think we should probably move on to Kendall's part now in the interest of time, and we'll keep these questions here. We'll try and pick them up at the end, and if not, we'll answer them in writing afterwards. But probably in the interest of time, we should move on to Kendall's part of the presentation. Jolene, thanks very much. Don't go anywhere because we might need you for the next Q&A. But Kendall, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick, and thanks, Jolene, for that excellent presentation. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining today. So my name is Kendall Harrison. I've worked at the MHRA for 10 years now, over 10 years, starting out looking at our yellow cards and processing those, doing signal detection. And now I've moved more into the systems delivery side of things. So today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the tools and resources for how we do data collection and management. You'll have seen from the previous sessions as well as Jolene's session how many things there are to consider, how much data you can be handling, and obviously it's important to be able to collect the correct information, collect volumes of that, and take appropriate measures using that data. And so being able to process that data and do it so consistently and with good quality is paramount for our ability to conduct pharmacovigilance, whether it's COVID vaccines or chemical products. It's important that we always do good pharmacovigilance. And everybody on the call, I'm sure, whether you're in an agency with 1,200 people or 10 people, will have had to deal with lack of resource. And it's important that we can use systems and technology to be able to support that for us. And that's what really today is going to be talking about. So if I can move on. So the topics I'll be covering today are an introduction to data collection tools, including a few examples from the Med Safety app, how we are using some of these tools to collect information for COVID-19 vaccine monitoring, how we manage the data that we collect, some signal assessment in brief, and then some of the outputs we can do with that. So on the slide at the moment is a slight overview of what we'll discuss. So initially, it's really important that we collect data. If we don't have any data, of course, then the following data management is not possible, and ultimately the signal detection that we need to do to make good regulatory decisions cannot be done. So data can be collected through a number of ways. So initially, pharmacovigilance started off with word of mouth, paper reporting, phone calls, etc. And now we over the last decade or so, we have online systems to be able to support this through websites, and more recently, mobile phone apps, which are really critical to being able to collect that information. The information we then collect can be reviewed and assessed. We need to make sure that the information we are collecting is coming in properly, that there are no technical problems, there are no issues that need to be sorted out, and be able to review the reports that are coming in for volumes and making updates as necessary. Those cases then need to be stored on a database, and it's important that we have a database to hold this information, because that's when you can interrogate the database. You can look for certain drug event combinations. You can search for the kind of cases you have on your system to see aggregated numbers of the types of reports you might be interested for a particular signal, for example. And then finally, we have systems to do the signal detection and help us out. Typically in the UK, we get about 45,000 reports every year. Each of those reports might have multiple suspect drugs and multiple reactions, and each of those potential combinations is its own drug event combination. Therefore, it's quite possible that you're looking at hundreds of thousands of drug event combinations a year, and it's not possible to manually look at all of those. So we use signal detection systems to be able to support the prioritization and triage of those reports, so that we can focus our attention on the possible side effects that are most important and will have most patient safety with them. So if we start with the Med Safety app, which is one of the main data collection sources we'll be talking through today. Back in 2015, the MHRA released the Yellow Card app. So as Jolene said, the reporting system that we have in the UK for collecting spontaneous side effects is called the Yellow Card. And we set up the Yellow Card mobile app for collecting suspected side effects from patients and healthcare professionals. Shortly after, Croatia developed their own app using the same functionality, and essentially it's exactly the same app in the back end. It just looks branded towards the HALMED Croatian regulatory agency. And then quickly following that, with support from WHO and the Uppsala Monitoring Center, we still supported the development of the Med Safety app. The first 2 countries to be onboarded to this app were Burkina Faso and Zambia. And again, this was exactly the same app in the background, but it was surfaced using different branding, and the information that's collected there is specifically for use for those countries that have adopted it. The Med Safety has a number of advantages. It's a free app to use and download, so anybody in a country that has adopted it can use it. It's available on both Android and iOS operating systems. It can accept multiple languages, so we already support a number of different languages, including French and Kyrgyzstan, for example, and it's very easy to enable multiple different languages, even local languages, so it's quite accessible to different groups of people. It can function without internet, so you can report via the app, and then your report will be sent as soon as you do have internet again. The app is personalized, so you can have regulatory logos and color schemes so that it looks more consistent with your branding in your own country. We associate with privacy policies to ensure that data is handled and that people that would be reporting are reassured that the privacy is managed appropriately. And we can also surface this on mobile phones as well as tablets. You can see on the right hand side we have 12 countries currently using the Med Safety app, and this is to increase over the next few weeks. And this is extending rapidly, and we're supporting new countries onboarding that quickly to ensure that we can get the reach of this mobile app as wide as possible to support data collection of suspected side effects. So the Med Safety app is in front of you now. So just for any of you that may not have already had a look, you can go onto the App Store and download it. You're able to create an account as a user. You don't have to, but if you do create an account, then you can see previous reports that you've already submitted. You select the country that you're from, and then you register and you enter the app version that you're from the country that you're in. The app has multiple features, not just for reporting, but one on the left-hand side, you've got news features. So for any interesting news related to either the regulatory authority or products you're interested in will be displayed in the news features. So it's quick and easy to populate extra news. We provide information on the types of reactions that have been reported previously to products, and this links in with the Uppsala Monitoring Center's data. So it gives users a quick overview of the kind of reports that have been received for the product that they're interested in. You can see previous reports, and you can also see on the right-hand side an example of one of the pages within a reporting form. One of the big benefits of this system is in the reporting forms, such that we can enable multiple different reporting forms. On the left-hand side, the image, you can see that there's an option for reporting a suspected side effect to a COVID-19 vaccine, and there's also a report suspected side effects to a medicine. This means that essentially for each of the different reports, as a user, a healthcare professional or patient can report using a different form depending on what they're reporting about. This means that the questions within the different forms can be different and can be tailored. You can see on the right-hand side, one of the forms that the UK is using and has been released to those using the Med Safety for medicines asks specific questions about COVID-19, about previous infection with COVID-19 and any tests that might have been given. The tests or the COVID-19 questions are only specific to the forms that are reporting against COVID-19 medicines or for vaccines in time. This means that you can ask really specific questions that are most useful for signal detection for a particular product, and makes it very flexible. We can also deliver reporting forms for specific disease programs For example, HIV or malaria, you can ask specific questions for those. So it really allows flexibility to collect the most important data to support quality. And in terms of development of a vaccine form, we've already talked about the AFI forms, but essentially at the moment our team are busy working on developing an AFI form to support vaccine reporting against the standardized WHO reporting form that you can see on the right-hand side. So we will be standing up this form so that anybody that's using the MedSafety app or downloads the MedSafety app in future will be able to report adverse events following immunization using the same kind of questions and fields that you would expect to see from the paper form, but that information will be collected via the MedSafety app as an additional way in which you can collect that information. Other aspects that we are looking at to support COVID-19 vaccination are active surveillance. I'm struggling here to move my mouse. There we go. So one of the limitations on spontaneous systems for data collection, which includes the MedSafety app or the yellow card scheme, where we're relying on somebody having a suspicion of a suspected side effect or a link between a product and symptoms that they have. There are limitations that sometimes you'll only get data at one point in time. So somebody will say that they've had a reaction, but you don't always know when they've recovered from that reaction and how long that reaction lasts, which is a big indicator of impact. We also don't often have easy access to denominator data. So for example, if we have a suspected side effect to products, we don't always know how many people have actually taken that product to allow us to put it into context. And so for the COVID-19 vaccine, we stood up a specific parallel system for active monitoring of COVID-19. And this has been stood up in the UK and has been live since last December when the vaccine campaign began in the UK. And the process for this is that people that are about to be given a vaccination will be asked to register to the website called Yellow Card Vaccine Monitor. And they'll be asked to provide information about their background, their patient medical history, any products or concomitant medication they might be taking. And they'll be asked to tell us when their vaccination will be due. Then on the date of their vaccine, we will contact them proactively and ask them to fill in the information for the brand and batch that they received, which is really important, especially given multiple vaccine products are becoming available. We've worked quite closely with the rest of the UK health system to make sure that people know about their brand and batch, but that's an important aspect of the vaccination campaign, is ensuring that information is easy to hand for people to populate that. So if there are any batch issues, and as Jolene's already talked about with our biologicals and standards team, NIBSC, it's for them to be able to ensure batches are consistent in their quality. But if not, then it's really crucial to be able to pick up on batch related issues. And so it's important that we ask that question and collect that information. We then contact the patient 7 days after they've had their vaccination to check in to see if they've had any suspected side effects. And we ask them if they've had any infection since, and this will allow us to keep a track of efficacy of the vaccine as well. We then follow up with them 14 days later after their first vaccination. And at that point, we ask them when their second vaccination is due. We then contact them once again at the point of their second vaccination and then follow up with them thereafter every 3 months up to about a year. And this will really help to give us longitudinal data for the vaccinations and really to be able to put into context how many people have had the vaccination compared to how many of those people have then gone on to have side effects. And then proportionally of those side effects, how many of those are those transient short-term side effects that you might expect with any vaccination. So that's going to be a really helpful supportive aid for us to be able to collect COVID-19 vaccination data and will be available to use via the systems, and we intend for MedSafety to be able to have a parallel system to support these kinds of activities as well. And in terms of all of this data that we are collecting, it's really important that these systems support the quality of the data that we collect. So all of the questions within the mobile apps are underpinned by E2B fields. So we currently work in R2, but many of you might know that we'll be internationally the standard to move over to R3 will be next summer. And so it's important that we're kind of building our systems out to support that data standard. There are validations, so if a user was to put in incorrect information, that they will be asked to review that before it comes and is submitted to the regulator. We use MHRA to support data collection in MHRA terminology, as well as drug dictionaries, which I'll talk about in just a few slides' time in a little bit more detail. It's also really important that we have quality assurance steps and audits. So within the team at the MHRA, we have steps for data review when it's being committed to the database, as well as we do audits to ensure that we are reviewing any reports for changes or for things that we may be miscoded. And it's important that we continue to do that and are always striving for the best quality information, because without that good quality information, then the ability to do signal detection is limited, either by missing information, which reduces your ability to take action, or worse, if you have misinformation, then that can lead to you taking the wrong action. So it's a really important aspect to any system to be able to ensure that it meets good quality and consistency, and that you're reviewing it at all times. So we've talked about now the data collection and how we get the information in, and now I'd like to talk about how we do the data review step. And the system that we have for this data review and overview is called the Vigilance Hub. This is a screenshot. It's essentially a web page that anybody using the MedSafety app, the regulatory authorities, have access to do a number of things. So one of the most important for regulators will be to see the reports that are coming in. And this is seen by the tile, which is called report management. So hopefully you can see there's line listings of all the reports that have been received. So it's really helpful to be able to see the number of cases that have been received by patients and healthcare professionals for your country. You can filter these and search for these based on dates and reference numbers, etc. But what it also allows you to do is see the status. So for most countries, the data through MedSafety goes directly to VigiFlow. And on a successful submission, these are then successfully acknowledged. And where there is no acknowledgement, it's easy to see that there's something that you need to pick up. So it allows you the assurance that the data is flowing correctly. Through this tile, you'll also be able to update cases. So as a piece of work we're currently developing is the ability to collect the information from the patient or healthcare professional. And then for the regulators to be able to look into this tile and update the case with any changes that might need to be made. For example, if there's information in the narrative that's not in a structured field, then you'll be able to update the cases here before that gets sent to VigiFlow or a database of your own choice, or in addition, you can send that update. The other benefits of the Vigilance Hub are the report configuration tile. So this is when I talked earlier about the different reporting forms, such that you could have a reporting form for medicines, for AFI, or for a particular disease program. All of this is configurable within the report configuration tile. Typically, this is something that MHRA would handle, just because it can be difficult to configure it without prior experience. But essentially, it means that we can easily add questions, remove questions, make different questions mandatory, and also tailor the text and the language that's being used. So there's a huge amount of flexibility which can be done in real time. So the lead times to make these changes is only limited to resource. It's essentially as soon as we make it, it's live in real time. So it gives us a huge amount of variability to be able to collect that information in the way you need. We also have the ability for regulators to be able to publish their own news. So this can either be via an RSS feed, which typically is the BBC type news feeds or WHO news feeds. But you can also publish your own specific documents or news articles, which can be done once again in real time. The Vigilance Hub also has the capabilities to update your users, to see analytics, and to really see what's going on with the reports that you've seen. You can also update things like your drugs dictionaries, etc. Next, I want to go on to databases. So the database is really important to be able to store your information as your version of the truth of that case, and be able to, as I said, be able to use tools to be able to interrogate that data or to look for the data that's held on that database. In the UK, we have a database which is called Sentinel. You can see it in this picture. The Sentinel database is split into two areas. In the top area above the grey line is the documentum area, and essentially this means that you've always got the raw copy of the report that you've been sent. So we have PDF versions or XML versions, and that means you've always got that reference point to see exactly what the reporter had sent, so that you can refer to that should you need to. And then in the bottom pane, you have all of the information that's collected in those reports. So you have the name of the drug, you have all of the E2B fields available to you to populate any information that is collected from the reporter. So this includes the drug, the dates, the indication, the routes that have been, the product was given, any concomitant medication, and as well as the reactions, and of course those dates, the outcomes, patient details, reporter details, etc. So really any data that can be collected on an E2B field is stored in here, and we use systems called Business Objects and Empirica to be able to look at the cases that we have in there. So it's really important to be able to interrogate that and ensure that your data in there is put in a consistent manner such that you know what data fields to be searching on. And the database in Sentinel is underpinned by, again, consistency of the data storage. So our drugs dictionary has a hierarchy to it to ensure consistency and quality in the information. So, for example, if you were to populate a product in the case folder, in the Sentinel case folder, then even if you're interrogating based on a substance rather than a specific product brand, you'll be able to find all the cases associated. It also means that for signal assessment, we can check at different levels. So if we're looking at a particular batch problem, we might only want to search for cases of a specific product. Whereas if we're looking for a wider issue related to the chemical substance, then we might be looking at a substance level. So essentially the way in which Sentinel is populated doesn't really matter in terms of being able to extrapolate, because we do have a hierarchy of drug terms that link into one another. And it's exactly the same way for MHRA. Kate will be talking more about MHRA in session 3. So join back up to hear more about that in detail, but essentially we also structure our data as aligned to the MHRA dictionaries. And this means again that we can search the data based on different hierarchies within that, whether it's the LLT terms or up to the system organ class. We have the flexibility to search on that, and this also extends to the SMQ type terms. And then finally, I'd like to briefly talk about signal detection. So once all of the information has been processed and is in the right place and in the right fields and is good quality, then we would do signal detection on this. And we in the UK do this once a week, and obviously every country has their own way of doing that. And for COVID-19, we're doing this more frequently. So signal is, there's a few different ways of explaining it. It's a drug or adverse drug reaction combination that leads to a possible safety issue. It can also be described as an alert from any available data source that a drug may be associated with a previously unrecognized hazard, or that a known hazard is quantitatively or qualitatively different from existing expectations. But in short, it's really, does the report we've received suggest that there's a safety issue we need to look into? And it's really hypothesis generating. And at the point when we see a report we might want to look into, we will then use all of the information available to us, whether it's through other spontaneous cases, through other studies or other regulators' information. We would look to validate that signal to decide whether any action needs to be taken. And once again, as with the rest of the process, it's important that we use signal detection systems to support our ability to triage cases. As I said at the start of the call, we get 45,000 reports a year, which once you extrapolate up to drug event combinations means that we have a huge amount of cases to review. So we need support from signal detection systems to support our triage of those systems, of those cases that we receive, sorry. So we have automated signal detection algorithms, which we've set up, and through help with our epidemiology team, we look at where our thresholds are best sat. In practice, the way in which you do this can vary between different databases. So it's important that you understand your own data sets to be able to apply automated signal detection in the most robust way. We look at disproportionality within the database, so our observed expected analysis to be able to identify flags or things that stand out more so that we can then look into them. And obviously the end game for all of this is to really ensure that public health is optimized and that any regulatory action can be taken rapidly to ensure that a product is used within the best therapeutic niche to maintain that the product is beneficial. So Empirica looks at statistical analysis using disproportionality. We used the EBGM is our one, but there are other types, and we use vaccine EBGMs separately so that we can differentiate them. This is just an overview of our database, the Empirica database where we do signal detection. Given we're close to the end, I won't go into this in huge amounts of detail, but essentially we have different ways in which we can look at the text, look at the cases and filter the cases. We have signal reasons to understand why a particular product or drug reaction might have come back. So whether it's because of disproportionality or whether perhaps it was a fatal case. We're able to look at all the statistics and the EBGMs or the other statistical analyses like PRR, as well as see cumulative other cases that we've received for that product. So it allows us to get an overview of the whole database in a quick snapshot. We can see SMQs through this system so that we're not limited to just looking at a PT level, which allows us to see the greater picture. We can also track the comments that have been reviewed by previous assessors over time, so we can build up a picture over time such that if maybe we didn't want to take action at one point because of lack of information, we can, next time we see a report, take some action. So it really helps us to track that information. And we can also link to other known reactions within the MHRA hierarchy. So if you're looking at, for example, suicide, you might want to look at all the other suicidal ideation or depression type terms. And finally, I'll just end on an example of the data output tools. So two examples up here, one of which I've showed to you earlier in the talk, which is within the Med Safety app, we have an output from VigiFlow, which shows the amount of cases that have been reported for a particular product within VigiBase and how they break down via different groupings, so reactions or age groups, for example. In the UK, we also have something called a drug analysis profile, which is an online interactive tool to be able to filter the kinds of cases that we've received again. So it's essentially very similar to what the Med Safety app offering has, but it's on a website format. So I'll finish there and thank you very much for your time. And just once again to wrap up, I guess all of these tools really do help us to be able to achieve our needs for pharmacovigilance And so we need to really embrace these systems and use them to benefit us, to free us up to do that analysis. So hopefully enjoyed and happy now to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kendall. Don't know, Jolene, if you want to come back in as well. We can pick up on just a few more questions that are in the Q&A box. So we've had a journey of the importance of data, vaccine specific view on that as well. But I think importantly, how technology can support the use of that data and how we manage it and understand what it's telling us. I think there's been some interest in the MedSafety app in the Q&A box. Important to point out that this MedSafety app is already available in Ethiopia, in Ghana and Nigeria. It's coming in South Africa. We're currently working on releasing that in the coming weeks. Kendall, I don't know if you've got a timeline.
Yeah, coming weeks is correct.
Yeah. So, and again, the AEFI form is being developed, and that should be released also in the coming weeks, and will be enhanced over time as well. There are slightly different versions of the AEFI form in different countries, so there isn't one unique form that each country has. So we're releasing a standard form, and then we'll be enhancing that over time depending on the feedback and the needs of users. So you can go onto the Apple or Android store, search for MedSafety app, and you should be able to find that for download, and then anyone can report. There was a question around who has access to the Vigilance Hub. The Vigilance Hub is the engine behind the MedSafety app, which is used by the National Regulatory Agency. We're also looking at how that could be used for COVID in this program, for the COVID vaccines, to the immunization programs as well, so that the EPI can manage some of the cases that they're receiving at the point of immunization. So the rollout and management of these tools will be taking place over the coming weeks in South Africa, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Nigeria, with access to that Vigilance Hub by each of the regulatory agencies, but also the immunization programs. There was a question around confidentiality issues. Turner, you asked patient-client confidentiality issues and ethics around the information. Any comments? I think within this program and at the MHRA, we're very mindful of the rules around data protection. We comply with all data protection requirements. All data that is collected is securely stored. We have high standards for data security, cyber security as well. And each reporter, so members of the public or healthcare professionals that use these tools, there is a data privacy statement that explains how we collect data, how we store data, and how we share data. We only share data in an anonymized format. But Kendall, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've said.
You've summarised it. I guess there's a new question from Mafora who's just come through, and it ties nicely as to whether the UK, as leads on the system development, have access to the data that countries have from the app, and can we use it, and how can a country protect its data? It's as Mick said, it's a really important part of our process to ensure that data integrity is always there, and the work around that is always put as a priority. As the UK, we intentionally have levels of different accessibility, and we only access any of the MedSafety systems as something called a platform manager, which means we explicitly do not have access to any of your data whatsoever, and only those that you, the country regulator themselves, authorize to have access do have that access. So no, we do not have access to that information, and that's yours and your ownership of that data to do what you need to do in your own country.
So just pick up a couple more in the last couple of minutes. Reports of good quality from countries should be given due attention to produce reliable information and response. I think what Kendall has shown, and also what Jolyn described around the importance of data, is that high quality data is vital for signal detection purposes, and the kinds of tools, including the Med Safety app, that are now available. If you wanted to tell us about a rash that somebody had had, maybe around the injection site, you could start typing that and then select from the drop-down list the specific term that meets your needs. Now that maps to the medical dictionary and drives up quality rather than free text data entry. So the more we can structure reporting forms and drive people to select the right drug terms or the right medical terms, then the analysis of that data is more rapid and requires less human resource to code forms, because the coding has taken place at the point of data entry by the user. But again, Kendall, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Again, I think you've covered it well. I think we're constantly looking to make sure that the data quality is improved wherever we can see that. And I think we're at a point where it's pretty high quality, but we're also quite flexible with making enhancements where we see that there are abilities. And obviously, for example, with COVID-19, we know that some of the data requirements are changing at quite a pace because of new information that's coming to light, and we're able to make improvements to collect higher quality information in areas of particular interest quite rapidly. So the systems really are flexible to ensure we're getting not only good quality data, but that we're asking the right questions at the right time. So yeah, lots of capability there to ensure that's maintained.
And I think also, Kendall, you described there how the form is can be tailored, pretty quickly by the user, and you can make fields mandatory. So that's also important to drive up quality. So, for example, to be a valid case, you need to have a reporter, you need to have a patient, you need to have a suspect product and a suspect reaction. So those fields are made mandatory, so nobody can submit a form that doesn't have those key fields in there. So again, you're driving up quality at the point of data entry, and the use of mandatory or optional fields is an important consideration. Jolyn, just going back to some questions that were raised, I think a clarification has come through in the chat box, which says, what is the importance of addressing adverse events of special interest, since all adverse events could be of significant importance to the programme? Why, I guess, so the question is, why is there a focus on AESIs rather than everything?
Thanks, Mick. So, and thank you for the question. So it is true that all adverse events are of interest, of course, as we continue to learn about the safety profile of the vaccine. But as I was saying, these AESIs are ones that we particularly think may occur with the vaccine based on either previous experience or data from animal models. So these adverse events are of specific interest to us because we are suspicious that these may occur with the vaccine for various reasons and various data that we've accrued by the time the vaccine's authorized. But yes, you should always be aware and continue to monitor all adverse events. They're all interesting to us. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Jolyn. I'm now conscious that we have reached our time. There are a couple more questions still unanswered in the Q&A box, but we must finish on time. We will be doing a written document of all of these Q&As, so apologies if we haven't picked up your particular question. We'll be following up in writing on those that we haven't been able to answer. Lastly, there is a poll. I don't know if, Alicia, we can bring the poll up. This is just for our evaluation on how this session has gone. There are 4 questions. I think before you can submit, you should answer all 4. So please go ahead and respond to this poll if you could. And that really helps us tailor the next sessions. We can respond to any feedback that we get here. Whilst you're doing that, just explain that session 3 of module 1 is in a couple of days' time, 21st of January at 10 a.m. And then modules 2 to 5, as shown in the opening session, will be running over the next few months, I think through to April/May, covering the full range of pharmacovigilance activities. So just while people are completing the poll, I would like to thank everyone for your attendance today and your attention, and your feedback is very welcome, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you. And thanks, Jolene and Kendall. Great job.